Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special edition of the Atacs podcast. We are adults, we talk about cool stuff, and today we are going to talk about our favorite video games from the year 2022. I am your host today. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. It is January 8th, 2023. It's the future, y'all. Joining me in the future are Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How's it going, Nate?
It is going well. 2023 is off to a start, I suppose.
You could say that. How is the future treating you, Will from Wendell?
You know, a little bit of dysfunction in our government, but it's new. I've never seen any dysfunction in the past couple of years, so I don't really know how to handle it.
I don't think any of us know how to handle it.
Yeah.
So you are in good company there. So yeah, our us three are going to talk about our favorite video games from the year that was 2022. One kind of table setting question before I talk about our format and we get going on the games. How did you guys feel about the year 2022 for video games specifically? Do you think it was a good year overall? Find a lot of stuff you like, or like, I don't know. What are your thoughts? Either of you can jump in here.
Yeah, there were two games on my list that I'm not going to name, but it seems like it was a lot of technical problems in a lot of games this year. Even kind of games that were had pretty decent production budgets and stuff like that. There was sort of most of the two that I'm referring to specifically were kind of games that featured a lot of online co-op, which there was one where I was spawning with just a torso or stuck in the ground. There was another one that was just like stuttering or disconnecting. And I don't know, it just seemed like, seems like there's a lot of rough release states, but that was kind of, but I found a lot that I liked, as per usual. So, but yeah, it just that struck me a little bit.
Yeah. I definitely ran into my share of technical issues in games this year too. I feel like this year I felt this last year a little bit, but I feel like this year I felt it even more of like, man, this is the year that COVID really affected game development. Like, we heard it in 2020 when COVID started of like, oh, COVID didn't really mess with 2020 because the games that came out that year were already basically done. So like COVID didn't really mess stuff up. And the thing I heard in some interviews was like the games COVID are really going to mess up were the games that were like in the middle of development when COVID started, because it's like that's when the real work's getting done. Because like the games that were early on, it's like, oh, they had time to adjust and adapt. The games that were already done, close to done, were pretty much done. But those games right in the middle, and those are the games that were probably coming out in 2023 because 2 years later. Big AAA games take 3-4 years, so this is about right. And yeah, a lot of them came out pretty buggy.
Mm-hmm. And still a lot of delays across the board.
Yeah,
throughout the year and into next year. So that's where we're at.
I also say it's kind of well, if you guys aren't done with that topic, I'm gonna let you keep going on that though.
Yeah, how'd you feel on the year, Nate?
Overall, it was pretty good. I found plenty of different types of games that I enjoyed. I don't know how I would compare it to other recent years, but I certainly don't have complaints about the games I played this year overall.
Yeah, I was also going to mention that it's kind of the year of Game Pass for me. I think fully half of my top 10 list is stuff I played through Game Pass, and that has become very much like a staple subscription. For the longest time, I found myself bouncing in and out of stuff, even streaming services like for shows and movies. But Game Pass has become like, all right, well, that's just money. I'm not, that's just going to be where that money's going each month, because they've been able to just, really keep it moving between, single player and co-op stuff. So,
Yeah, for sure. Game Pass is still super strong.
So do we want to declare a Game Pass Game of the Year?
Yeah. Let's do that.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I have no idea what Nate would say. But I don't know that. Maybe we'll save that till the end. We'll save the Game Pass.
Okay, we'll keep that surprise. Yeah, no, Game Pass has absolutely been great, and like it's especially, I think this year is especially like Microsoft basically had no big first party games this year. Like they had Grounded and Pentiment and what else? And like those are not exactly like top tier, like highly marketable games either.
Yeah.
So it's like they really didn't have many first party games this year. And even with that all three of us are sitting here saying like, yeah, I played a lot of stuff on Game Pass this year. That was great. Like it's just a strong service. It's like, can you imagine if they had what they had this year plus like top tier Microsoft first party things? Like that would be even better. Like, so, and that's shaping up to be probably what they're going to have next year with like Starfield and Redfall and Forza and whatever else they manage to get out next year. So, yeah, I think for me overall, as all of us do every year, definitely found a lot of games I enjoyed playing this year. I do think for me, when I was making my top 10 this year and I was like comparing it to my top 10s last year, I was like, I don't know how many of the games from 2022 would have made my top 10 in previous years. So that was kind of like a contrast point of like, I do think for me it was a like relatively weaker year, but that doesn't mean that there weren't games I really liked from this year. The thing I always say is like, even the relatively weaker years have a lot of good games. So in that sense, there are no bad years. It's all relative. But we did have games we enjoyed, as all of us have just said. So we're going to get into talking about those. Our format this year is something we haven't quite done before. We have 3 people this year, so it makes it easier to kind of talk about each person's individual list. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about all 3 of our top 5 games of the year. Each of us has made an ordered list of our top 10 favorite games. And all 3 of us will shout out our full top 10 at the end. But for discussion purposes, we're only going to talk about our top 5s. And we're going to go around the room one at a time. I'll start with Nate and I'll say, Nate, what's your number 5? Nate will say what it is. Then if either Will or I have that game on our list but higher than number 5, we're gonna say, hold up a minute, wait a second. I have that game higher, and we'll wait to talk about that game until we get to where it exists at the highest point on someone's list. So in that sense, we kind of order it from, the games that are high on people's list we'll talk about later, if that makes sense. But by the end, we will have talked about all 3 of our 5 favorite games of the year, give them a good discussion, talk about why we like them and why they stuck with us so much this year over everything else we played. And as I mentioned at the end, we'll kind of give a quick shout out to the rest of our top 10. But we're going to make discussion room for our absolute favorites, our top 5s. And if I missed anything, someone speak up. Otherwise, I think covered the logistics, and we can get started talking about some video games. How's that sound?
You're killing it.
All right. Doing my best here. And yeah. So we're gonna start with Nate. Mr. Nate, what is your 5th favorite game from 2022?
My number 5 game for 2022 was Tinykin.
Anyone got that higher?
Someone may have that in the exact same spot.
All right. Well, then we will go ahead and so all 3 of us played this game. So and number 5 is where it's at. So yeah. Right. What did you like so much about Tinykin?
Tinykin is just an excellent 3D platformer collectathon in the early 3D platformer vein of your Mario 64s, your Spyro the Dragons, and those ilk, where you load into a level and there's a bunch of different types of collectibles and a big environment to traverse around, and you use all your traversal mechanics to try to find everything, find all the little secrets. And this is just a really good one of those. I think it controls really excellently. I think its visual style is great. Bright, vibrant, happy. This game is just like a feel-good video game in every way. It's got cute little bugs that you help out with all their little troubles in this house. It's like a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids situation where you're tiny and in a just a normal house where I think people used to live but don't anymore, and you're helping bugs solve their problems and collecting pollen, nectar,
parts.
Spaceship parts,
but also pollen. Yes, pollen nectar.
And skateboarding around on a bar of soap and doing sick grinds on the bar of soap and floating in a little bubble across the rooms. And it is something that it doesn't do anything new, but everything it does really well and is really endearing and fun. What did you think, Will? Do you have any?
Well, I think this came out in August. And I think I've mentioned, if you guys have sort of read the words I've written about the games I like this year, I started a new job in August as well. Super hard job. So when you're talking about, playing this game that's sort of relentlessly vibrant and happy, I think that was part of the reason that it really resonated with me at the time. Is because I didn't want anything difficult at that moment. I was just and this isn't even a genre that I like. This is kind of the magic of Game Pass. I've never been, the both of you could be like, well, this is right along there with my favorite 3D platformer collectathons. And like, I'd be like, yeah, dude, my list is like Tinykin. That's like it. But I got in there, and like every time I got into it, like I played it for a significant period of time, and every time I stopped, I had this giant, grin on my face. You walk into these really, really well-designed rooms, and you wonder about, how am I going to get up on that cabinet? And then, you keep, poking around at it. And at the end, one of the nice things about the game, and I guess maybe all the 3D platformers do this, I don't know, but after you kind of get to a hard to reach place, there's usually some little silk bug that you kind of unlock, and he shoots this string of silk kind of all the way across the map. So at the beginning, it takes you forever to get anywhere, and you're kind of like painstakingly making your way there. But then once you get there, you get that little silk bug to shoot the string out, and then you can zip around the room you can get anywhere you want in like a matter of seconds.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
that was a huge thing for me, is like you enter this space that takes forever to get around, like you said, and then by the end you've just made like 14 layers of shortcuts to get between any 2 points in the room immediately. It's great.
Yeah, so that's a good time. And it's also really forgiving on the platforming too. I mean, you've got this nectar / pollen / whatever it is that your hops, fizzy, whatever you're collecting. Essentially, you increase the length of time you're able to float in your bubble, and that can help you a lot of times on like a jump that's particularly tricky or difficult. And I think even if you miss the jump, the game seems to be, and I don't remember it setting me back all that much sometimes. I mean, it wasn't very hard on that front. And I just like these sort of environments too. These sort of like walking around in a giant, like, making a human-sized house feel enormous. And I think if Grounded hadn't been a survival game, I might have been more into that too, just because it kind of shares that sort of aesthetic. Although I suppose it's in a yard as opposed to a, kitchen or toy room or whatever it is that you're hanging out in Tinykin. But yeah, it was just a good time. Just brought the big smiles, brought the big happy, brought the big colors, So I was into it.
Yeah, this game definitely has a feel of like, if Rare had like, it's like a lost artifact of like, if Rare had put out an extremely polished like collectathon game in 1999 for the 64, but this in some ways feels way. I mean, obviously it's got decades of advancement on it, but like feels even more polished than those games. Like it controls super well, and like I think what you guys were saying about like the level structure of like you were talking about like the shortcuts where you get like the zip lines back, but I think more broadly, I think the levels are just like really polished and like cohesive in their design, where it's like there were a couple levels where like when I started them up, it's like, man, this level just seems really big, and it's like I don't even know where to start, but it's like they're designed really well that like you can just kind of pick any direction and start going, and the level is going to kind of like naturally like and like without even showing its hand, it just kind of like effortlessly like guides you through places, and you know you end up kind of exploring everywhere, and it feels pretty good to do that and just zigzag back and forth through the level collecting stuff.
Yeah.
And just to kind of bring up, I think I think it was Vice talked about this, with Tinykin, this idea that, each of the areas has these two kind of thresholds when it comes to collecting the pollen or whatever it is. So there's the initial amount of pollen that you kind of have to collect to sort of see. I can't remember exactly, but it seems like you have to collect it to proceed. But then after you hit that threshold, they're like, okay, so here's actually how much is actually in the map. And so it still made you feel like you had done something, even if you hadn't scoured every single corner, which I think was a really good sort of psychological trick, and it really worked for me because I was like, well, okay, I got this zone clean enough, or whatever. But I thought that was a really kind of a nice touch for the kind of a collectathon type game to have that piece in it.
Yeah, the other piece I'll touch on real quick that I really appreciate about this game is that it is kind of a throwback in a lot of ways to 3D platformers, which are in that space now where that's the nostalgia play that a lot of developers are going to is the 3D platformer collectathon. But it doesn't do like they cut out all the stuff that like never really made sense for those type of games, like combat and stuff. Like the fact that there's no combat in this game, I love it because it's all just about exploring the space and like doing little quests and finding
the spaceship
and building the spaceship. Like you don't need to be like hunting enemies off of the bookshelf. We're just finding the pollen in there.
Yeah. And it feels very, as you mentioned, it feels very good to play the whole time. Like the controls of it just feel spot on the whole time.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, and in a year, we were joking about games feeling kind of buggy and unpolished. I think I might say Tinykin is one of the most polished games I played from 2022. Like it's like if anyone wants to gripe about like lack of novelty or doing anything interesting or whatever like that, you could also point at it and just be like, I feel like that's a game they knew exactly what they wanted to make. Yeah. They had their vision. They set out and they just freaking nailed it. Like Tinykin's a game I look at and it's like, I feel like they just did everything they wanted to do and they pretty much nailed all of it. Like it just feels very polished and very whole.
You may not like what they do, but they did it pretty well.
They did it very well, I would say. Yeah. Cool. Any last thoughts on Tinykin before we move on to the next game?
All good.
All right.
And Splash Team made that. I don't know, just to give a dev shout out. I'm not sure what else Splash Team has done, but
me either. But good job, Splash Team.
Yeah.
And that was also, I think someone mentioned it, but that was one of the many Game Pass games this year. They won on Game Pass. And Will, was that also your number 5?
It was.
All right. So Nate and Will's number 5, Tinykin. So that'll move on to me. My number 5 is Marvel Snap. Is that higher?
I have that higher.
All right. I had a feeling. So then we will wrap back around to Nate. What is your number 4?
I'm just gonna control this whole process.
Yeah. Or what is your number 4, Nate?
My number 4 is Triangle Strategy.
All right. Triangle Strategy. Will, do you have this higher?
No, sir.
The face he made in response to that question.
All right. Well, Triangle Strategy is also my number 4.
Oh,
so
boom!
We are tied on this one. So yeah, what did you like so much about Triangle Strategy, Nate?
Oh man, we did talk at length about this one in a separate
We did.
discussion, but
We'll shout them out as we go, but yeah, we did do 4 separate spoiler casts this year, and
mhm.
Triangle Strategy was one of them. So there's a whole spoiler-filled discussion about that.
Yeah,
Just sort of said at the start of this, we're going to try and avoid spoilers, but
yeah,
um,
sure. So Triangle Strategy is a tactics game with a big ensemble cast of very diverse playing characters, so everybody has like a very specific way you're supposed to use them in the turn-based battles. And I think both the tactics and like encounter design is really, it's all really well thought out and well made and fun without being overwhelming to me as somebody who enjoys tactics up to a point. And if it gets too complex, then I'm like, okay, my brain hurts and I don't like this so much anymore. So it's like, it feels like for me that sweet spot of there is definitely complexity there. You got to use all the characters correctly. You got big maps with lots of enemies and lots of characters on your side. You're trying to manage turn order and all of that, but it never gets so granular that I couldn't parse what was happening or make good predictions about the right moves to make. So that all just kind of lined up for me personally really well. And then the narrative stuff, I ended up being very surprised by how much I enjoyed it, which is a big focus of our separate discussion. But basically, there's lots of big narrative choices you have to make about what your ragtag bunch of folks are going to do throughout the game. It takes a lot of big turns, lots of twists, lots of questioning motives of all the different characters involved, and what's everybody's real end goal, and lots of points for me where I was like not sure, like what is this game really about? Where is this game going? And it just kept me on my toes the whole time in a way that I really enjoyed.
yeah, this game really surprised me, and both on its like mechanics and in its story, but kind of picking up what you were talking from where you were talking about on the story there, like the opening hours of this game are like very dull and very slow, and I'm like,
Hmm.
man, this game's just gonna have no bite to it. It's just gonna be just the most like mundane fantasy like plot that's like trying to follow in the lines of like a Final Fantasy Tactics or something
Yeah,
like that, and it's just
'cause I
never going to have its own identity and like
Yeah, because I feel like that is a thing that happens a lot, especially with like strategy and tactics games. For me, at least, it's like, oh, they set out to make a specific type of game mechanically, and they may do that very well. But like maybe there wasn't too much ambition outside of that combat design, and like I can enjoy those games sometimes, but this one was one I, like you're saying, was expecting to be that way.
yeah, and especially in the early hours, I think it is that game. Like as it's
Mhm.
setting up the world and the characters, you're just like, especially some of the main characters, like Sarah Noah specifically, is just like, man, this guy is like the most boring Boy Scout you've ever seen, and it's just like, come on, dude. But like, really, once you get past the first few chapters, once you're like, I don't know, half a dozen hours in or so, like it just really starts going wild with some of the story swings. And yeah, we talked about this at length, but I really appreciated by the time I was like halfway through the game of just like, yeah, I didn't see any of this coming, and this is getting wild, and I am here for it.
Yep.
And yeah, just the way the characters just, I feel like at some point all of the characters just decide, you know what, this is my time to go for it. I'm going to make big swings, and every character starts throwing down, throwing the gloves off, and I was really surprised at how much I ended up getting into the narrative of this game. And then mechanically, yeah, I think it achieves that sweet spot you were talking about of like giving you a lot of like interesting tactical options. Like I thought the battles were really fun, um, but also not being overwhelming. It's like kind of that sweet spot where it's like there's enough going on that it's not boring, but also not
Yep.
too much going on that it's such that it's so it's not overwhelming. I thought it was a really good sweet spot there. And I really appreciated that, like, as you mentioned, every character had their own unique abilities, and more important, they're all fun. You know, like
Yeah.
if you have Huette, your archer who rides a hawk, like she has really good like status effects she can apply, and she has good mobility. It's like no other character can do those two things in that way. And then like finding out, all right, well, how do I use Huette to the best of her abilities and maximize her potential? I thought was really fun. And yeah, I just think all that worked really well, and I was really surprised because like I play a lot of tactics games in this mold, and I think I have generally a more uh maybe let's say a bigger tolerance when they are mediocre than you do.
Right.
But even this one, I was like at the start, it was like, oh, this doesn't seem to do. I've played so many of these games, like this doesn't seem to be doing anything like that much different. But like as the game went on, it was like, okay, I see what they're going here. They're finding like a really nice groove that's like feels like pretty streamlined and pretty polished, but also still interesting and has some depth to it. And it's like, okay, like this is a good balance. Like I'm into this. And yeah, I like by the end of the game, I was just like, man, I really like this team of characters I put together. Like I really like the abilities I have. Like this battle that's taken 40 minutes, but it's like it's interesting the whole way through. And yeah, and then that combination of story and mechanics was really into.
Yeah, definitely.
There were a lot of tactic games that came out this year, and this is probably my favorite. I mean, it's the highest one on my list, the highest tactics game of the year. So I guess I can say it's my favorite tactics game of the year.
Tactics game of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. And we did do a full spoiler cast if anyone would like to listen to that. You can find it in the feed. Any
A lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah. It gets weird too.
That game gets wild. It's fun.
Yeah, weird in a way that I think is fun. All right, any last comments there, Nate?
Nope.
All right. So then Mr. Will, what is your number 4?
My number 4 happens to be God of War Ragnarok.
All right. Does anyone have that game higher? No? All right.
But does anyone have it lower?
It is in my top 10. It is not in my top 5.
All right.
All right, and all three of us did play it. Mr. Will, why is it your number 4 game of the year?
Well, it bounced back and forth a lot when I was thinking about it, whether it was going to be a number 3 or a number 4. It was another AAA prestige title that it was sort of fighting with, and I'll leave that for now.
So much
suspense,
right? I mean, we got to keep the listeners on the edge. So yeah, I guess the things that I enjoyed about it. First of all, it first starting, it looks great. We did. This is another game that we did a full spoiler cast on,
yes.
And one of the first things we touched on in the spoiler cast was how good the game looks, and that same quality carries into kind of the gameplay feel. It carries into the acting, I guess, the voice actor mocap performances. So it just feels like you're being treated to something where Sony spent a ton of money on it. So it's a good time. I think the combat is fun and impactful. Throwing the Leviathan axe feels as good as it ever has, which is, I guess only really just comparing it to the previous release. It still feels good. So if you played that one and you felt like it felt great, that didn't go away. It's still feeling good. I felt like there were a lot of build options, which if anyone knows me, that's sort of what I like to do. I like to kind of express myself in the games I play. And so that usually extends to me coming up with some unique or seemingly unique to me way that I can approach things, or trying to make something that's very coherent, or let me lean into this mechanic and do it as well as I possibly can. So there was a lot of, even though you had to kind of go out of the way to find some of the pieces that you might need to create a build, whether or not you were specializing in poison or frost damage or catching enemies on fire, there were a lot of options there that you could take advantage of. I thought the side activities in it were generally pretty enjoyable. There wasn't a whole lot in it that I didn't think was kind of enjoyable to do. Although there were a couple bosses that were kind of spongy, that I didn't really go into trying to take out. As a general rule, I kind of enjoyed doing everything that I did, and I did most of the stuff in the game. There's some really, really great story moments, and you said that we would dodge spoilers, so I will say that there's an encounter with what might be best described as a cosmic dog, which sounds like a George Clinton song, but but yeah, or I guess that's Atomic Dog, but yeah, there's a cosmic dog. There's a fight with a man who can see the future. Those moments are very, very strong and very impactful, and will get you turned. In terms of things that I didn't love, because I like to give it a little balance, felt like you don't feel all that powerful when you're playing the game, at least when you're playing on kind of the standard difficulty. And two, I felt like it took a while to get places compared to some other AAA games. Like you might go to a specific like zone, and it's like there might be one or maybe two teleportation gates. And that becomes really evident like when you're trying to like clean up some of the interesting side content. So, there's content where you're trying to find these like baby worms essentially that are in these rifts. There's also side content where you're trying to find, trying to go and deal with other things. But some of these things that are far away from gates, if you're actually trying to clean up this content, you realize like, man, this is a long walk. And they really don't have a lot of mounts, and there really aren't a lot of these gates. So compared to some of the AAA open world games where you've got like fast travel locations that you can head to all the time and you can just call them out of anywhere, it becomes evident that like it's a bit of a slow paced thing. Now, if you're into the whole just hearing, Mimir talk and hearing the characters talk, and there is some degree of that's really enjoyable. But there are definitely times where I'm like, come on, let's go. God, damn it. I'm over here like paddling this boat for like a decade. But anyway, but overall, I thought it was a great time. Always kind of interested to see, this one in particular is Santa Monica Studio. So a high quality studio, very interested to see what they're going to do next.
Yeah. I think we actually talked about that in our spoiler cast of maybe the one shot camera made maybe one downside is that it makes it take forever to get places.
Yeah.
They're not going to do any like just instant narrative breaking teleportation quick fast travel. What do you want to add to that, Nate? What did you like about God of War?
I liked a lot of the same things Will did. I really ended up in the combat pretty strongly, and got way too into collecting every little thing. So I ended up 100%ing this game. And, I think it just does. It is no small feat with a game this big, but it does just do, for me, everything that the previous game did better.
I would agree. I liked it more than the previous one as well.
Yeah, I could say maybe, except for the overall narrative. Like, I think everything about this game is better than the previous one.
It really feels to me like I do think I like it. Like the first 2018 God of War was.
Yeah, you can't say the first one.
was like more novel, but I to me it feels pretty clear that they learned some lessons from that game and they just like tightened up a couple of things. So I think like in terms of just like mechanics or writing or like just some of those like fine-tuned nuts and bolts, it feels like they made a more solid, more polished game. And you can continue with what you're about to say. I think you're about to say something about the overall narrative, or you maybe didn't like as much. But
yeah, I think the overall narrative I have some issues with, but nothing major. But it does still have those really strong moments, like Will was saying, and like we talked about in our separate discussion. Like there are definitely multiple big moments in this game that I can think of that like really had me either excited or angry or like in the way that they wanted to from a narrative perspective. Like they really hit some some strong moments throughout, even if the overall narrative I think is a little weird. But yeah, those moments are really good. I did really enjoy the combat. I enjoyed finding my build that allowed me to just punch my way through everything with basically just punching with poison status effect and just scouring those environments and finding all the ravens and completing all the side quests and looking through all the different armor pieces and saying, that sounds neat, but I'm just going to stick with my poison armor. It was a fun time.
I'm glad that option's there for people who don't like poison fists, but
yeah, but if you
I've
want to get good at the game,
what camp I'm
those
in.
losers.
you just play the poison fist build.
Yeah. This game definitely has some fun moments, and shout outs to that future seeing enemy you fight that Will mentioned. That was that guy's a real piece of work.
He got what was coming to him.
Yep, he gets his.
He didn't see it coming. Oddly enough.
Yeah, it's a highly polished game. Like, it looks great, sounds great. Like, I think the acting is really good. Like, the actors did a fantastic job, both mocap and voice acting. I think there's a lot of strong dialogue too. Like, I got kind of annoyed at how chatty the characters are, and they just would never stop talking. But like, there's also a lot of really good dialogue moments in there. And I think even if I might agree with Nate that the overall story is kind of, has its weird moments, but I think the actual like moment to moment writing I think is really strong. And yeah, it's a cool game. Anything else to say about God of War Ragnarok?
I think we got it covered, and if listeners are hungry for more, we've got another 2 hours and some change.
There's a whole 2+ hour spoiler cast for God of War in the feed if you want to go find it. So there's a lot more of us talking about that game for sure. All right, I think that covers everyone's number 4s, because my number 4 was also Triangle Strategy. So we're wrapping around to our number. We're into the top 3. And Nate, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is Elden Ring.
And we're going to talk about that later.
Yep.
All right, Will, what is your number 3?
Horizon Forbidden West.
All right.
Number 3.
We have a Sony fanboy in the house.
Yep.
Will.
I can't dispute it,
So I think, Nate, unless you played this and I didn't know it, I think, Will, you're actually the only one who played this game on the panel.
Yep.
So
this is
I'm
one.
the one who played it. Period. Not just on the panel. I'm
the one sale that Horizon Forbidden West had was
we
Will.
finally found the one person who played Horizon.
Thank goodness,
Yeah.
Or else
This
I
is
wouldn't be
this
here to
is
talk
one
about
this is the one of the big games this year that I had to sacrifice on the altar of Elden Ring.
And
other big games I played.
I understand.
During the 4 months of the year when.
If you listen to certain apologists, they would say that Horizon has always been stuck in the shadow of a bigger release or whatever. But I don't know that I really care about all that. But
doesn't matter.
I'm always of the mind that 2 big games can exist simultaneously. We've seen that happen many times before. It's Horizon. Horizon is just fine. That game sold. That game got its props.
So, things that I liked about Horizon. Okay, this was the other game that I was bouncing back and forth between Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West because in a lot of ways there's a lot of similarities. They're both very big. They're like kind of, I guess this one's more open world really than God of War Ragnarok is. But they're both they got the mocap, they got the big name, or not big name actors, but, I guess they got good actors, very good. Ashley Birch and Lance Reddick do a really good job. I just love these types of worlds in games. This sort of world in which it's sort of like humanity was at the top of the food chain, and something went down, and now like sort of nature and dilapidation has sort of become prominent. I think actually at this very moment I'm playing through The Last of Us Part 1, and it's got a very kind of similar style to it. You know, you're walking through these sort of old, you know, factories and stuff that have now been completely overgrown with weeds and trees and everything. And so I just, something about that I think I really enjoy, you know. I'm trying to figure out, I haven't delved deeply enough into my own psychology to figure out why it appeals to me in the way it does, but every time I get an opportunity to play a game that does something like this, I'm like, ooh, get me
So,
in there.
Will, have you ever played a game called Tokyo Jungle?
Yes, I have.
All right,
And,
good man.
Yeah, and I think I played it with you. We were, I think we were hanging out and we played it. But anyway, so I love this world. I think it's got great characters. You know, Silence, played by Lance Reddick, Aloy, played by Ashley Burge. Very good folks. I think there's a lot of great build options in it. I think I ended up going for this sort of machine tamer type of build where I was trying to basically get the ability to tame as many machines as possible, as quickly as possible, and then have them stay on my side and fight even more effectively as long as possible. And there were lots of great armor pieces that like helped me kind of maximize that. I think the arc, without going into any kind of spoilers, makes a lot of sense for Aloy. Although it did kind of get a little wild. You know, it doesn't feel quite as cohesive as the previous game. But in terms of what Aloy does, it makes a lot of sense. I felt powerful in the game in a way that I guess I didn't in God of War Ragnarok, and that was maybe one of the reasons why it kind of edged it out. You know, there were these enemies, like there's like this gigantic, like fire-breathing gorilla that you could fight, and he's like insane, and he can take you down in like a matter of seconds. But if you like sneak up on him in the right way and use the right move, you can put like huge dents in his health. You know, that you can't really, that I wasn't able to do in Ragnarok, no matter how well prepared or how I approached the enemy. It was just like, this dude's going to be a sponge baby, and that's just how it's going to be. You're going to get in there and whack on him forever. I also
this is a giant fire-breathing robot gorilla, just for clarification, right?
Boom. I think he's called a fire claw. There's also a
Hello.
frost claw, which does kind of the opposite sort of thing. It's sort of a giant, I guess, frost-breathing gorilla.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, so yeah, those are some good. It's also quick to get around. You know, you can get a mount anywhere. The mounts are pretty powerful themselves. You can get some that are almost like giant rhino or something like that, and just ride that thing around. At one point in the game, you get a flying mount, which really opens up everything tremendously, and that feels really incredible to use. You know. Especially because it feels a little bit like maybe you're cheating the game, because there are all these little, like there are all these collectibles that are up these like hills in Horizon, you know, and Horizon is infamously gives you these little yellow, like this is where you climb stuff. But there's a lot of these things where it's like, hey, go collect me this ancient civilization lens. And you have to like climb for like, 15 minutes to get up there and get it. And then once you get the flying mount, you're like, that's for suckers, and just fly all the way up there, and kill whatever it was. You don't get this mount till late game, but it's a huge surprise when you get it, because I mean, I didn't even know that they rendered the game in that way. In my mind, I'm like, well, could they even give you something like that? Because isn't it the type of thing where it maybe isn't only rendering what you're looking at, or maybe a certain radius around you, but then once you get the flying mount, you're like, man, this is powerful system that we're using here, the PS5. So that was, I think those were a lot of the things that I loved about it. In the end, I felt like it made me feel a little bit more powerful, which is a reason that I like playing games. I like, not feeling like a dude who has clicky knees and gets out of breath sometimes when he goes up too fast up the stairs, So I think it's fun to me to play games that'll kind of give me this fun power fantasy. And also I just like the world more. I'm just more of a sci-fi person these days than I am sort of like a fantasy person, Maybe at one point when I was growing up, I was more into the whole like mythology stuff, but now I guess it's more sci-fi for me. So,
And that
so yeah,
that
that's
particular style of sci-fi that Horizon does, that is post-apocalyptic and has like the robots and all of the like corporate sci-fi stuff that you're finding out about the history of the world. Like, it is super unique and interesting, and I really like that about the first game.
yeah.
They called it the post apocalypse.
Right.
I don't know how much they earned that term, but that's how they marketed the
Oh
first
wow.
Horizon.
Anyway, also this is Guerrilla Games. Like to give a little dev shout out to. But yeah, they for a time there, I think they did like Red Faction and stuff, and then all of a sudden they were like, let's do this gigantic, expensive, prestige third person thing.
They weren't Red Faction. They
I think it
were
was
the
Killzone.
people.
Killzone. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, they had done a bunch of first person shooters. Either way, I guess what I'm recalling is that it was a big departure from what they
It
were.
was, yes.
Yeah.
That it was for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, and do you feel like so I played Horizon Zero Dawn, but not Forbidden West. And one feeling I had when I finished Zero Dawn was, man, I really liked how this story wrapped up. It felt like a, a good arc with a good ending. And then there was like a post credits zinger or something. There was like some little scene at the end that was like, oh man, now they're dangling threads. But
Right.
do you feel like, and I guess I don't know how you felt about the ending of Zero Dawn, but do you feel like you liked how this game continued the story from Zero Dawn, and do you think like it kind of, or other than being another like fun open world romp, like do you think narratively like it was a good follow up to Zero Dawn?
It's a weird thing, because in the sense of what happened with the story at large in the world of the game, there were times where it did feel a bit messy. But in terms of the character specific growth, I thought it was very good. So it was almost like I like what it did with Aloy, but I'm not sure I totally loved what it did with the rest of the factions that are present in the world, and kind of maybe the general gist of the storyline. But yeah, so I think of course, it doesn't do a lot that's super new from the first one. So I really think it should be probably the type of thing that if you like the first one, and you want some more of that, maybe with a couple different. I think the skill trees are more developed. There's more different weapon types. There's a whole lot more of the machines in there.
Yeah, even just you
So
saying that there were a lot of good build options, like that's not something that I particularly remember being a strong point of the original game. And maybe I just didn't pay attention to it, and it's been a while, but I don't remember feeling
thinking,
like...
Yeah, I don't remember thinking that there were a lot of build options in the first one.
Yeah, so that is a good thing to hear.
Yeah. But yeah, it's solid. I had a good time. I think it was actually the game I played more than anything else on the PS5 in 2022. So I clearly got into it.
Cool. Well, that is Horizon Forbidden West. That was Will's number 3. And that brings me to my number 3, which is The Case of the Golden Idol, which is the very last game I played at the end of the year before writing my list. Some kind of caught me off guard a little bit, but I ended up really liking it. Like, it's probably its closest comparison is like something like Return of the Obra Dinn, where you're playing detective a lot. You're trying to figure out what's going on. But I think I actually ended up really appreciating the Case of the Golden Idol's structure as something that like I think sets it apart a little bit, where you have 11 total cases in the game, and each case mechanically is pretty self-contained. So it's like it kind of prevents the mystery from getting too sprawling and having too much stuff to think about. So I think in that way it was like a really elegant design of like kind of presenting you these self-contained cases that are pretty manageable, but that also doesn't prevent it from ever being it never feels too simple, even though all the cases are pretty self-contained. Like the first 2 or 3 are maybe like a little quicker as you're learning the ropes, but pretty quickly in there you're getting into some like pretty some pretty intricate cases. And I think they do a really good job with the cases of like making you pay attention to all the little details. And if it's not clear from what I've already said, you are like kind of playing detective, so to speak, and each of these cases has a murder that's happened, and you're trying to like piece together what happened. And while you're doing that, you're paying attention to all these little details. So there might be, I'm kind of making this up off the top of my head, but it's like, oh, you might find like a letter in a drawer that's like written to someone from another character. So it'll like be signed by one character, addressed to another character, might have a date on it, and it might like mention something that like happened last Tuesday. So then you have to like kind of piece together like, oh, what was the date on that Tuesday? Like, and like you're kind of like very organically piecing together events from these very natural like context clues. And I think they do a really good job at like mixing up what type of clues they give you, because it can really range from things as straightforward as like, oh, you're reading a letter, to things like, oh, just like noticing like a scratch on the wall, or like, you know, something like that. Like you really have to pay attention to the all the little details. And I think this is where they really gain a lot by having each case self-contained, is that the playable space in each, you know, by the last couple scenes, you have, you know, 3, 4 or more rooms, but like a lot of the cases take place in just like 2 or so rooms. So like, and when I say a room, it's like just one screen on your computer, or whatever platform you're playing on. So like, you don't have to spend a lot of time like jumping around between a dozen rooms and trying to remember where everything was. It's really like, all right, you got a nice focused set of clues to look through, and then really pay attention to everything and digest it and piece it together and like really lay out this case and organize it. And I just found that whole process just like super exciting, and I feel like they pulled it off really well. Like it really feels like they considered every little detail and where it goes, and it feels like everything was just placed perfectly to kind of like allow you to go through that deduction process in a really satisfying way. And I just like, I ate this game up. Like the whole time I was playing, I'm just like, man, this is great. Like all of this thought process just like feels super good and like feels super rewarding as I was piecing it all together. And then I think like it all came together in the end to like the story it tells is like pretty wild by the end. Like it starts out of this story of like, oh, these like there's the golden idol, and it's like this artifact, and it's like, oh, some like rich aristocrats or whatever like squabbling over this artifact, and you know, it feels it's, the game takes place in like the 1700s or the 1800s maybe. I forget the time period, but it's like, I don't know, these rich people squabbling about stuff, and then it you know, fairly quickly diverges into like cults and rituals and secret societies and like people taking over governments and like just all this like big conspiracy stuff, and it gets pretty wild. And like by 2/3 of the way through, I'm just like, man, what is going on here? And like and I think it wraps up in like a really nice way of like the last case is like the last case is the one case that's kind of looking back at everything. It's like, all right, let's piece together all that happened. And I think it was a really good way of just like, I feel like they really stuck the landing on that in a really cool way. And yeah, the whole experience, it was just really into. It was like just a super clever game from top to bottom.
Would you say were there any moments where you kind of it was just hard to figure out exactly kind of what you were supposed to do? And then I guess in those moments, did you feel more of a like, who could have come up with that, or I'm an idiot, I should have seen that, or if you're not self-deprecating, if you just said, well, I should have looked at that a little longer, you know, or something like that.
Yeah, I actually think one of the strong things about this game is, at least for me, and everyone probably has their own threshold for this kind of stuff. For me, it was pretty much the perfect difficulty balance where like I had to think through things after those first couple introductory cases. Like those ones were pretty straightforward, but like after that, like nothing was super, like nothing was too easy, as I guess how I'll say it. But I also never felt like it got quite too hard. There were maybe 2 or 3 spots where I was like, I'm not quite picking up what they're putting down here. Like, I'm not quite wrapping my head around this. So there were maybe two or three of those spots, and I ended up never using hints. So the game actually has an in-game hint system built in, and I never actually used it. So I can't say for sure what it is, but I think the hint system is like kind of a layered hint system where like you can get the first hint that's like a really light hint, and then if you still need more, they'll like give you a progressively like more helpful hint. And I think eventually it'll just tell you the answer. So like if you're just super stuck, I think you can just follow the hints through the end and get the answer. Which I think is a really good touch because like I don't know, if people get stuck in a game like that, like just give them a way to get through it. Like it's fine. If you don't give them
Yeah.
that way to get through it, they're going to go look it up on the internet anyway. So like just put it in the game.
I think that's a good idea. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that this is a fair question, but being someone who sometimes can have a low frustration threshold for these things, would you say that it was more or less difficult than Obra Dinn? Would you say overall that when you talked about that sort of challenge level, would you say that it kind of was, or are the experiences too disparate to really compare in that way?
Uh, to me, I thought it was easier than Oberdin. Oberdin, I think, gets a lot of complexity because it is kind of one big interweaving thing. I think the Golden Idol, by breaking it into individual cases, I think makes it easy to just kind of like compartmentalize and like not get so overwhelmed with all the choices. So to me, I found it a little easier than Oberdin. Some people may feel a little bit differently, maybe different the way different people's brains work. I don't know. Um, but for me, I found it a little easier than Oberdin. Um, and like I said, there's a hint system in there if you need it. And I never ended up using the hint system, but there were definitely two or three times where it's like I probably had to stare at it for like 20 minutes and like keep going over the clues until it finally clicked. So there definitely were some spots that's like, okay, this isn't super obvious what's going on.
Gotcha.
Nate, I know you've been playing a little bit of this game. Is there anything you wanted to add before we move on?
No, I don't think I really have much to add, but I have been playing it. I think I'm probably at that like 2/3 mark where things are starting to get a little crazier, and so I am definitely interested to see how it kind of wraps up. I've definitely gotten stuck a few times and been like, I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of this. But I've either been able to figure it out or just brute force it because of the way the interface is set up. You can kind of brute force some things sometimes. But it is fun to just like pile all the clues together and sift through it and be like, okay, this makes sense because of this, this, and this, and it can't be this because of, these other three things. So it is that kind of logic puzzle feel to it that does feel good when you start slotting things into place.
Yeah, it's a really good type of logic. It is a type of logic puzzle that I like a lot, and they did it really well.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we're up to everyone's top two. That was Case of the Golden Idol. It was my number 3, and next up, Nate. I already know what it is, but tell the folks what your number 2 game of the year is.
What is it?
It is Marvel Snap.
Yeah. Marvel Snap.
Which was my number 5, and we delayed talking about it until now. But yeah, why is it your number 2?
This is so I've been playing it as a mobile game, phone game. I think you can play it as a PC game.
Yeah, so funny aside here, the first time I played it, I actually played it on Steam because I didn't. I was like, I just started hearing about it. I'm like, oh, this game's out. I'll give it a shot on Steam. It's free. I like playing games on my PC more than I do my phone.
Yep.
And
you're like, oh wait, this is a phone game.
Yeah, I played one match on Steam, and it's like, it's very clearly just a phone setup. It's just like this vertical column in the middle of your screen, and then everything to the side of it's just black. It's just blank.
Black bars.
It's a phone emulator.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going here. I'm going to play it on my phone.
Yeah. It's definitely made for phones. It's definitely made for like, I have 2 minutes while I'm waiting in line for something. I'm going to play a match of Marble Snap. And it does that excellently. It is a competitive deck builder starring Marvel characters. streamlined and pared down to like the maximum degree possible while still maintaining, I would say, a pretty high level of deck variability, decisions to make during matches, and a hefty dose of randomization. I, it's I don't even really quite know where to start talking about it, other than I've played a lot of this game, and I still play it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes I think I hate Marvel Snap because I play it too much.
Yeah, and I get that, and I've heard a lot of people say that on other podcasts I listen to and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but actually I still really just like playing Marvel Snap, even though I've played so much of it.
I played a game right before we started this podcast, while I was like waiting for everyone to be ready, and it's like, I got 5 spare minutes, I'm gonna play. And honestly, for me, like, I think that really is the thing. Like, I think so. Like, there have been a lot of other pretty good digital card games that have come out over the years. I mean, Hearthstone chief among them, and that's relevant because the people who made Marvel Snap are the people who made Hearthstone.
Yeah.
But like, Hearthstone, at least at launch, required you to sit down at a computer and play it, and it's like, I wasn't ever going to do that long. But then they made a card game, Marvel Snap, and put it on your phone and said, oh, a match takes 5 minutes or less to play. And all of a sudden it's like, it's like anytime I'm waiting around for like 10 minutes, I bust out my phone and play a match of Marvel Snap, and it slots right in there perfectly. And like, I think for me, the form factor really is a big part of the appeal. And
absolutely.
And I mean, it also wouldn't have been one of my favorite games of the year if it also wasn't a very good hard card game. And obviously it's coming from a lot of card game veterans who have made a lot of card games before, and that shows. Like, it's a very well made card game. It's very streamlined, like you said, and it's like there's a lot of fun interactions in there that play very well.
Yeah, like every little core system is so well thought out. You have 3 locations that you can play cards at. You can only put 4 cards at each location per player, and you have a 12 card deck.
Yeah,
so you like
card deck. The matches last 6 turns. Your energy increases
6 turns.
Per turn, and it's like all of that feels just so balanced. Of like, oh, you can see why it's 4 cards at a location with a 12 card deck and 6 turns. All of it just feels right.
Yeah. And the pacing of how cards ramp up in power from 1 energy to 2 energy to 3 energy, all the way up to 6, like the power scaling of those cards feels appropriate. You can sometimes find, or very, very often find, combinations of cards that synergize really well together to build a whole deck around, or to build a deck that has like 2 or 3 different, seemingly different feeling synergies in them that then kind of work together to make an overall strategy. Or you can just go for the big swing and say, well, if I draw these 2 cards together, I'm probably going to win. But
but
that's
you might
a less reliable, that's a less reliable deck.
Yeah, and like, I mean, to your point about like them massaging all the numbers, it's like you have a 12 card deck, you start with 3 cards, and you draw a card for each of the 6 turns. So like most matches, you see 9 of the 12 cards in your deck, which I feel like is just enough cards that your deck is mostly consistent, but also leaves just enough randomness where it's like, there's 3 cards you're not going to see. So it's like you can't bank on getting your 1 key card every match.
Yeah, and then you throw all the variables of the locations and whatever your opponent's going to throw at you that might mess with your hand, mess with your deck, mess with what you have on the board, prevent you from playing cards in certain places, or incentivize you to play cards in certain spots. Like, all of those things just come together to make it that even though it's a 12-card deck and only 6 turns in a match, there's still so much variability that every match feels pretty distinct. Which I think is probably the biggest achievement that they managed to hit that.
That's the main point I was going to make if you didn't make it, is that, because I mean, I've played a lot of this game and I play the same decks a lot, but every match still feels very different. I think the locations are probably the biggest contributor to that, because the 3 locations, like every location has a different effect, and they can be wild. Like they can be incredibly game changing.
Yeah.
Like there's one location that straight up says destroy the other location. So now all of a sudden you're playing on a one location match.
Right.
And that could pop, and the locations, one of them turns over on turn one turns over on turn two, one turns over on turn three. So like even that one location, it makes a big difference whether it turns up turn one or turn three, because if it turns up turn three, anything you've played at the other two locations is just gone. But if it turns on up turn one, you know what you're working with from the start, and you can kind of plan. So like, and I mean, and that's just one location out of the dozens they have in the game. So like, the locations really just make every game feel so different.
Yeah, and then you can start building decks around a specific location when it's like the featured location. Like today it was Luke's Bar, which was like it'll bounce any card you play there back to your hand immediately. So I was like, I'm just gonna make a stupid deck full of cards that have effects that happen when you play them on reveal abilities. And so you can throw down this card, their on reveal ability will happen, and then they'll come back to your hand, which kind of wastes your energy in some ways. But I was like, I'm just going to make the stupidest, meanest deck I can make and do all the cards that do negative effects to your opponent on reveal, and just throw these guys down every turn and just frustrate them until they leave the match.
Yeah. Yeah, I think having a featured location of the day is also interesting because it allows you to kind of try and account for it if you want, because you're going to see that location more frequently. Yeah, it's a amazing time sink of the game that I continue to enjoy playing. And we haven't even talked about the snap mechanic, but that's also another clever thing where it gets its namesake, where you're kind of wagering these cubes, which are how you gain and lose rank. So when you win a match, you win whatever cubes you've wagered, and when you lose them. And you can choose to snap if you want, and that'll double your wager.
Yeah.
It
serves as a like doubling down and bluffing mechanic if you want to try to get into that like meta game playing into your opponent's head kind of thing. I am somebody who traditionally doesn't really like or care about competitive games, and definitely doesn't care about ranked competitive modes. But this game designed it very well, and this is the only option. So it's just like, well, you're going to be in ranked whether you care about it or not. Which, in some games that would bug me, and I wouldn't like it. But I feel like with how fast it is and how simple it is to understand and like get into the ranking mindset of trying to maximize how many cubes you're winning and minimize how many cubes you're losing in matches that you're going to lose by retreating. Like, it just works really smartly.
Also, it gets wiped at the end of each season anyway, so who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
It's going to hit a big reset button anyway.
Yep. Anyway, Marvel Snap is great. I'm going to play a bunch of it in 2023, I bet.
So are there elements, I guess, how do they make the how do they make the moolahs? Yeah. What do they do?
There's a $10 season pass every month. So you get like extra resources to upgrade cards cosmetically through that, but you also get one new card as part of the season if you buy that. So there's one card that is locked behind the paywall each month that will come into the regular rotation like 3 months later, I think.
Yeah, so like the first season was a Spider-Man themed, and the Spider-Man card was what you got for buying that season pass, but I ended up getting that card like 2 seasons later once it got added to the regular pool.
So yeah, how many cards do you think there are?
There's a bunch. I don't even know at this point.
I don't know. It's actually kind of wild how long I've been playing, and there's a lot of cards that I see my opponents play a lot that I still don't have. So it's like I have a good number of cards, and I still regularly see cards that I don't have. So
yeah,
I don't know what the actual what number count it is, but it feels like there's a lot when you're playing.
How many of the season passes have you guys bought? Have you guys done it any of the months?
I have bought one season pass.
Yeah, same.
So I
Okay.
I bought a $3 starter bundle and a $10 season pass. So I've spent $13 on the game, and that's all I've spent. And I mean, honestly, I feel like it's a game you can play for free, and it's like
Oh yeah,
totally fun. Like I don't think you need to spend anything to enjoy this game. Nate, I think you just bought your first season pass. So I mean,
yeah.
you
I
played
didn't
you,
spend anything until the beginning of January, so I
yeah,
played
you
it
played
for
this game
months
for
without
months.
paying anything.
Yeah. If you go to the store page, there's also a bunch of like card upgrade currency, so that'll like upgrade your card tier, which is mainly a cosmetic thing, but also upgrading cards is how you earn new cards.
Yeah.
Is there any
So
kind of trading? Could you trade with other users to get a card you wanted?
there
Okay.
is no trading.
Hmm.
Yeah. I would say for my in my opinion, as far as free to play games go, I would say this one is pretty good. Like I feel like you can play it for free, uh, and it feels totally fine. Um, I mean, there is definitely there is definitely some like free to play currency bloat. There's at least
Mhm.
two different currencies, maybe more.
There's at
Um,
least three
oh,
now.
three. Yes, they added a new one.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so like if you go look in the shop, it's just like, man, this just looks like free to play nonsense.
Yep.
Hmm.
And to some degree, it is, but I think they do a good job of balancing that probably necessary evil with also making it a game that you can totally play for free, and
Gotcha.
it feels fine from what I've seen. I don't know if you hit a point after a certain number of hours where it's like, oh, I'm just not earning new cards unless I pay more money. Um, there's certainly a possibility that it could slow down at some point, but
But I haven't really hit that yet, and I've played a lot.
yeah, same, which is pretty incredible for how much I feel like I play that game.
Sounds good.
All right. With that, that was Marvel Snap. That was Nate's number 2. So we are moving on to Mr. Will. What is your number 2 game of the year?
Nobody saves the world.
Wait, who saves the world?
Nobody.
Poor world.
Seems like somebody should do that.
Seems like they should, but they didn't. Nobody did.
What made this such a big favorite for you?
Well, it's co-op. That'll get you part of the way with me. That's usually a good start. But I think part of it is that there is a part of me that enjoys the sort of like dopamine hit, like from completing a goal. You know, I mean, it's one of the more fun things about hanging out in a video game world is that you've got that causality where you put in the work, you get the reward, so on and so forth. I've heard different gaming sites describe Nobody Saves the World as a game that, like, quote unquote, makes the grind fun, you know? And so essentially you're this little pudgy nobody, and you find this wand that allows you to transform into a different form. There are, I don't know, 20 maybe something forms. There's like a bodybuilder, a magician, a rat, a zombie, a mermaid. There's tons of them. And each form has, goals that are associated with it. And after a time, you can begin to mix and match the different abilities that you get from the different types. So you might have a bodybuilder who can bite enemies like a zombie and gallop like a horse or something like that. And the quest sometimes they'll make kind of clever usage of the different forms. Like you won't be able to, complete a quest unless you're able to switch to a certain form, or unless you realize that this particular form's ability is kind of what you need. So each form kind of has 3 different moves and a passive. And typically you can kind of begin to mix and match to kind of create your own weird Frankenstein abomination. There's also areas of the game that you can't get to unless you're in a certain form. Like the rat allows you to go down narrow corridors that you can't get through with another form. There's the mermaid allows you to swim. The ghost allows you to float. And so those can help you get across like water areas to get to new stuff in the game. But the thing that's kind of the most fun to me is just like there's just always something to kind of be working on. So you might unlock your first form, and the rat has like this bite, It's like a chomp. And the goal might be, kill 30 enemies with the chomp. And then you do that. And the game's like, cha-ching, here's some experience. You beat the goal. And then it'll give you 2 more goals. And then, you might complete those goals. And as you get experience with the form, you unlock new abilities for the form, and then new goals become available with the form. And so at any given time, you've got like 5 or 6 different goals that you're working on, and you can work on all of them, or at least 2 or 3 of them simultaneously, which just feels like really good and efficient in a game. It's like, well, I could be killing enemies, opening chests, using health potions, kicking people with my horse, and blah, blah, blah. You can do all these things at the same time. And sometimes you might, actually complete these goals at the same time. And then you'll go into your little screen where it shows you all your quests, and it's like, cha-ching experience, cha-ching experience, cha-ching experience. And then it'll lay out a whole new set for you to do. And so the whole time you're playing, you're trying to kind of come up with something that's efficient and effective. But then, of course, you're also trying to kind of always meet these little goals. So the game is kind of like played at these 2 kind of levels where you're doing the actual stuff that you're doing, but then you're also trying to hit these little goals. So it's fun to kind of create. You can, again, another game where you can kind of create a build. You got like, well, what kind of passive do I want? Which abilities do I like the most? Which form is fun? So it's also got a great soundtrack. Probably, although it's my second favorite game of the year, it's also probably my second favorite soundtrack in a game for the year. So I just thought it was a blast. It's also very, very colorful and hilarious and cartoony. There's this rival wizard named Randy who feels like he should have the wand and you shouldn't be the one who has the wand. And he's always like walking at you and like saying absolute nonsense, and he's just got really bad luck too. So he'll walk up and try and fight you, and he'll get like trampled by a bull. And then the animation will show him like all like dilapidated and decrepit walking up to you. But it's just a blast. And so every time I played it, I was like, man, that was a really good time. When can I play that again? Until the end. So, and I think they have a DLC for it, but DLCs are always a little tricky on Game Pass. It's like, well, what if the game goes off? Will I still have the DLC? And how does that work? But so I haven't messed with that, but yeah, Nobody Saves the World. It's Drinkbox Studios, which I think also did Guacamelee. Hopefully I'll get that right since I got the last one wrong. But
yep.
Anyway, yeah. So
Guacamelee and Mutant Blobs from Space or something like that, and also Severed.
Okay.
They've done quite a few games at this point.
Yeah, but if you have a bud to play this with, or even if you don't, it's a real good time.
Nice. Do you think the co-op was do you think they implemented the co-op really well?
Yes, I think so. At the same time, this was one of these games that was unstable. So, like, part of the reason, that this game couldn't get any higher, which it got pretty high on my list, but I just remember
can't go.
Yeah, there's not too much higher than you go, but I guess to me, when I first played it, there was a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth because there was a lot of instability. There was a lot of like freeze frames and disconnects and stuff like that. And it was hard to figure out like what caused them, like was there a particular patch or was a particular host worse than the other one? But it seems like they've ironed all that out. I have some friends now who are playing it on PS5 and they haven't mentioned anything about the stability. So hopefully it's sorted, but, overall, it's just kind of fun being in this world, and so being in there with a partner is even more fun. But it's not the type of thing where there are some goals, like so. For instance, it might say something like, punch an enemy with the bodybuilder after that enemy is poisoned, and you can help your partner with that. Like you might be trying to poison the enemy, and then he can run up and punch him, and vice versa. You can help each other meet these goals for your forms to unlock new forms and new abilities for the forms that you unlock, and so on and so forth.
Cool. That is Nobody Saves the World, also a Game Pass jam, and Will's number 2 favorite game of the year. He gives it a thumbs up, maybe even 2 thumbs up. Next is me, I believe, with my number 2 game of the year, which is also was a day one Game Pass launch, and that is Tunic. Yeah, I obviously really like this game. It's my number 2 of the year. And I think how to start this? So like at first glance, it definitely, I mean, it's even going for this. Like your character looks like he's wearing like Link's tunic and has like a shield and sword that looks very, it very much has a Zelda-like vibe at the on the box art, so to speak. And like for maybe the first little bit of the game, that's kind of what it comes off as, but it doesn't take all that long while you're playing the game to realize like, okay, there's something more going on here, and you start kind of poking at corners of the world, and it ends up really being a game about like mystery and discovery and just learning how to interact with the world. And like this is going to sound like really silly, but it's even things of like, how do you interact with the shop? Like, how do you buy upgrades? It's like things like that are just not very clear. And you could potentially go a ways through the game without knowing how to do that. And then eventually you're going to figure it out. And it's like, I think the game does a really good job of making something like that not frustrating at all, but really feel kind of like the point of the game of like, okay, you're just learning how to interact with this world, and that process of learning that is really fun. And the whole central part of the game and what makes it all work is its in-game instruction booklet, which serves 2 purposes in my mind. The first purpose is it is like a fun nostalgic throwback thing, because we are of an age where like, you'd go to Toys R Us and buy a game, or you'd go to Blockbuster and rent a game or whatever, and you'd be like in the car on the way back home, like excited to play this new game you just got, and you're like, you bust it open and you're like flipping through the instruction manual, like, oh, like look at this art, it's great, and like you're kind of reading through that, and it'd get you excited. And Tunic's a digital game; it doesn't come with a physical book, though. There's probably a collector's edition that has that book. I don't know, but for most people, you're not going to actually have that instruction booklet. And as you're playing the game, you don't start with it either, but as collectibles in the world are pages of this instruction manual. And you find the pages out of order. You're not finding page 1, then 2, then 3. So you're finding these pages scattered in scattered orders, and these pages are what instruct you on how to interact with the world. But even the pages themselves are mysterious. So it's a really fun process, and I think they did a really good job of like how they place these pages in the world, and how those pages kind of subtly guide you towards what you need to be doing. And there is a quest here. There's a quest with goals and things you need to collect and bosses you need to beat, and there is an end to the game that you're striving towards, but your route through the world could vary drastically depending on, what way you start going and what pages you find in what order. And like, you're just kind of piecing this world together. And I thought it was a really fun mystery to solve. I thought it was a really great twist for that type of game to have like that level of mystery to it, where I like Zelda type of games. I like these types of action games that we've been, going back decades. Like I've played a lot of these types of games, and Tunic, for having like that kind of presentation and that kind of control scheme, and like, you do have you are running around the world top down, you have combat, like, it is that type of game, but it feels very different from other types of games. And I really appreciated that. And I really liked how it just felt surprising the whole way through. Like I could never quite, like I never knew what was coming next. And like that kind of surprise and mystery, I think it pulled off really well in a way that was really rewarding without being frustrating. And even some of its final, I probably still have it somewhere. Geez, the final end game, like mega puzzle that requires you to like get all the pages and like piece together this big puzzle. I have like a notepad where I was like scribbling it out, like trying to figure it out, like unlock the secrets and all of that. And it's such a great use of that in-game instruction manual, which but also the art in that instruction manual is incredible. Like it's one of the coolest things. Like they really captured the vibe of like, I don't know, a Super Nintendo era instruction manual. And it's just like super cute and well drawn, and like all of the art in the game, both in the instruction booklet and in the actual play space, is all like this game looks incredible. And also one of my favorite soundtracks of the year as well. Like the whole audio visual presentation is just fantastic. And yeah, that whole process of just like piecing together the mysteries is great, was great. Yeah, and it's one of the most unique games I played in quite a while, I would say.
Yeah, it is. It is really cool.
About how long is Tunic?
10-ish, 15-ish hours? I don't actually remember. I played this game earlier in the year. I don't actually
Sounds
remember,
right.
but somewhere in that time frame. It wasn't like neither super short nor super long. It was a good average-ish length, I would say.
Okay.
I know you also played this, Nate. You got anything else you want to add here?
No, not really. I absolutely think it sounds great. Instruction manual is like the highlight idea that they had for this game that works super well. Yeah, I mean, everything you said is true. That it is a game about mystery and exploration and discovery, and they put a lot of time into crafting that world and all the paths and all the secrets and how to make you kind of Metroidvania traverse your way back and forth across the spaces and finding new secrets and new ways to move around, but not gated in the same way as like a Metroidvania is gated by knowledge and by you discovering new things. So it is definitely a cool thing.
Yeah, I agree, and it was my number 2 of the year. I might even say that instruction booklet might be my favorite like mechanic or idea of the year because it's really
Yeah,
cool.
that's totally fair.
But yeah, that was my number 2 was Tunic. And now we're up to the number ones, the games of the year. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think both of you have the same number 1, the same game of the year. So
I think so.
Nate, what is your game of the year?
Citizen Sleeper.
And Will, is that also your game of the year?
It certainly is.
All right. So Citizen Sleeper, double game of the year here. So whichever one of you wants to kick it off, or why was it your game of the year?
You want me to start, Nate?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing that I want to say about Citizen Sleeper is it's like absolutely like a mood. To me, when I'd boot the game up, the soundtrack, which to me is the best soundtrack of the year, would start would come in, and it was almost like the surroundings in the room would just sort of like drift away until I was like just totally in this sort of forlorn, like sparsely populated, dilapidated space station. And the writing is so like relentlessly excellent, and it touches on so many of these themes that I think have become more and more important, as the three of us kind of age and see sort of the holes in capitalism and late stage capitalism. I mean, in a sense, the game starts with the theme of kind of planned obsolescence, which is this sort of the thing that, for any listener who's not aware, I think Apple was accused of it, but the idea was sort of forcing updates on a phone until the phone was sort of like no longer could kind of run, to sort of almost force someone to do an upgrade. And essentially your main character, and this is not really much of a spoiler because you learn this at the very beginning of the game, you're like this consciousness in a borrowed body, and the body begins to break down unless you pay or find a certain compound to kind of keep you around. And a lot of the quests that you do, a lot of the people that you talk to are struggling with various aspects of this sort of late stage hyper capitalistic sort of space that you're in. And to kind of add to this idea that you're on the borrowed time, you can only do a certain number of things each day, and there's sort of always this kind of ticking clock, at least at the beginning of the game. I will say that the ticking clock aspect of it kind of becomes less prominent as you progress. But definitely at the beginning, you're trying to kind of scramble to make sure you have enough of this compound to keep you whole, to keep you functional. And also trying to sort of use your time in the best way you can. Of course, this even gets more, there are times that the dice rolls, as a general rule, it's better if your dice rolls are high. But there are times as you progress through that you'll actually find things to do with your lower dice rolls as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that was kind of the combination of those things to me was probably the best. I mean, one, the writing being good and it touching on so many important aspects of what seems to be kind of our current experience in capitalism and the holes that the people that it's left behind and the people that have fallen through the cracks. And then two, the way that it so excellently put me in a certain mood, it kind of just pulled me in and kind of held me there until I ended that play session.
Yeah, 100%. And just to continue on all of those same things you were just talking about, like the quality of writing, the quality of the soundtrack, the visuals, the themes that it's presenting. I think the reason Citizen Sleeper hit so hard for me, or one of the main reasons, is just like the world that was created here that you play in. It both felt like you are a speck in this giant galaxy with so much going on that's so much bigger than you, and all these forces that are just completely dominant in this world, in this galaxy, and you are so insignificant, and you just kind of ended up on the space station, and you're probably going to rot and die if you don't find a way out, and nobody's going to care. And like, it's that, like, feeling so big and so overwhelming, and then they at the same time craft a story, a narrative, cast of characters that make the small stuff feel so important and so impactful and so meaningful, even in the face of this like feeling of overwhelming, like not just even like overwhelming sadness or melancholy or like everything's terrible, but just like things are so big and you're so small, but then still like your single interactions with other characters can feel so impactful, and the relationships that you build feel so meaningful, and that is just all due to the quality of the writing and the moods that it puts you in. And I can't think of another game that so efficiently creates a feeling like that for me.
Yeah.
Because this is not even a long game. It's not a particularly complicated or deep game mechanically. You know, but somehow they with their writing and their world building and soundtrack and everything coming together, just so efficiently create this space that feels real and magical at the same time. It is like a bunch of different things that don't feel like they should mesh together. Certainly not as easily and quickly as they managed to in this game. And I was just so blown away by that feeling that I got every minute that I spent with this game.
Yeah, I feel like I've played a lot of emotional narrative heavy games,
right.
Even some of my favorites, things like, What Remains of Edith Finch and On Home and some of these things like this. But they don't really, I don't think they grab you and like yank you into the world in the way that Citizen Sleeper does. You're Edith Finch, you're kind of walking around, a house, and it's,
Yeah.
nature kind of, going home, exploring exploring this abandoned house, and you find your dad's 80s tapes, and it's emotional, and it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting, well written, but, to me, it was almost like whenever I booted Citizen Sleeper, it would grab me and like pull me into the experience in a way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think, the indelible impression that it'll kind of leave for me as I think about 2022.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I could probably talk about this game for a while, but like I can't shake how much I feel the sense of what that world is about, and then
Mhm.
I still like, even though I played that, I think early in the summer. I don't know. It's been a while, at least a few months,
It
and
came
like I
out in
said,
May.
yeah, and it's not a long game. It's pretty short, you know. But like I can still see so many of those characters and remember exactly what happened in their storylines and how I impacted it and how I had to make hard choices about what was going to happen with them and me. And like, man, it really, all of those moments in that package just hit me so hard that no other game was going to beat this out for game of the year for me.
Yeah. And this is a developer called Jump Over the Age, which I'm not familiar
Yeah,
with.
I'm not either. I wonder what if they've done anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played this too, and I think the main thing that stuck out to me is both of you said it. The writing is fantastic. Like they do a really great job with all of their world building and writing stuff. Um, and yeah, you
Yeah,
guys, you guys said it. It's another Game Pass game,
another Game Pass game.
another strong Game Pass game.
Mm-hmm.
Their previous game was In Other Waters, which I did play and I liked, but
Oh,
I
I didn't.
didn't love
Yeah.
it the way I love this one.
Yeah. It could get, it kind of, it was a less focused game, I think.
Yeah.
All right, anything else either of you want to say about Citizen Sleeper, your game of the year?
Everyone
Go
should
play
play it.
it, listeners. Yeah.
Play it, please.
Get on it.
Yeah.
Get that Game Pass.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, and that brings us our last game is my game of the year, which it feels weird to say that this is the obvious pick after who would have thought in 2009 that we'd be saying something like this, but yeah, my game of the year is Elden Ring, which is seemingly everyone's game of the year. It's a weird journey for that studio to now be like the most mainstream thing possible
Yep.
after being like the most quirky, just hardcore, like, I don't know, just oddball RPG series. But yeah, I mean, this game pretty much took over this year for lots of people. It was a huge hit, and I definitely enjoyed it a lot. I played it for 150 plus hours. Like I wouldn't have, I'm not someone who will stick with a game if I'm not enjoying it. So like me just saying that I played a game for 150 plus hours means I liked it a lot. And like I'm not going to do that if I'm not enjoying the game. And you know, with a game that big, there is some bloat in there and there's definitely some repetition and a little bit of tiredness, but the fact that I stuck with it speaks volumes. And I would honestly, genuinely say the vast majority of those 150 plus hours, I don't actually know how long it was, but at least 150. And the vast majority of that time was well worth it. Like the way they've crafted their world and like the way you're able to kind of explore it in whatever way you want, I think is just really fascinating. And like, the different secrets and tricks they put in there, it's like they definitely use their world, I think, better than most open world games do. Like the way that you interact with that world and the way you're able to like explore it kind of in your own way. Like when playing their previous games, like Demon Souls or Dark Souls or Sekiro or Bloodborne or any of their other games, like I don't know if you agree with this, Nate, because you've played all these games as well. But like
Yeah.
when I think of something like Dark Souls or Demon Souls, it's like I can still picture like so many areas and moments of those games. Like they're stuck with me. Like they're very memorable. Like they're very From Software is very good at just like creating very memorable areas and bosses and moments, and like
Yes.
they're very good at like communicating with the player intrinsically in those ways, and like kind of just like communicating their spaces and their characters and and all that stuff. And I feel like a lot of open world games, like just in their breadth, like kind of lose that. But even thinking on Elden Ring, it's like I can still remember so, and you know, we'll see how I feel about this like 5 years down the road or something. But like right now, I still remember like so many specific, hyper specific like moments and places and things from Elden Ring. Like they're still somehow able to like take their From Software's like super like their just level of craft that they've applied to more contained games, and they've somehow over this much bigger game in Elden Ring applied that level of craft to just every aspect of it. And like they're proving to be masters of what they do. I mean, they've iterated on this over enough games at
Yeah.
this point, but like I just think it's super impressive like what they've pulled off. And like honestly, before Elden Ring came out, I was thinking like, yeah, I don't see how they can make their type of game as an open world and be as good as like their previous games. And it's not my favorite of their games, but the fact that like I still like it is, you know, it's pretty darn close. Like it's up there. Like it's in the ballpark. Like the fact that they were able to blow it out and be a lot bigger and still, you know, be in the conversation with their other more like focused games, I think is, to me, the real achievement of Elden Ring is that they were able to make it so much bigger and not lose, you know, much, if anything, of what they accomplished with their previous games. And I think for a lot of players, I mean, like this game was huge, and I think for a lot of players, it gained something with the open world as well. Um, and yeah, I just the variety of the builds, the sheer variety of like bosses and like things you see in the world, like it's a huge game and there's just tons of surprises that are fun to see. And I think the ways they mess with the player too is is really fun. Like the first time you go down, you know, underground, or the first time you get teleported somewhere, just, you know, all these moments that are just like games like open world games just don't do stuff like that where they're just interacting with the player in that way. And I think From Software, like I think one of the best things they do is like they interact with players through their game design in like very natural ways, and they're very engaging games. And Elden Ring does that on a bigger scale, and it's really impressive. And I had just a ton of fun with it. I have multiple times since finishing Elden Ring have like genuinely considered starting a new character or a new game plus, which sounds insane for how long that game is, but like also I genuinely think I would have fun doing that. It's just a good time.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
what you're saying about the world design is really impressive. You know, I mean, I play a lot of open world games, a lot of open world third person stuff, and you know, when I was thinking about it, listening to you talk, I mean, you know, what comes to mind to me sometimes are the games that kind of pull from actual life. You know, so for instance, like you know, your Watch Dogs 2 that's sort of set actually in San Francisco and it's got the San Francisco landmarks, or like Division 1, which is set in New York, or Division 2, which is set in Washington, D.C. You've got all the landmarks there. But then when I actually pull back from real world settings, maybe the first Dying Light has a couple areas in it that are very kind of memorable. But other than that, even the stuff I like this year, like stuff like Horizon, like I'm trying to think of like specific landmarks, or like, I mean, there's some areas in Horizon that are kind of distinct, but nothing that's sort of like etched into my mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's how often how I feel playing a lot of open world games. It's like, yeah, they made this big playground space, but it doesn't. A lot of the areas don't stick with me, and Elden Ring just has very distinct and memorable locations. It's like there's Volcano Manor and Stormvale Castle and all of Caelid, the hellscape of Caelid. Like, you know, all of these areas. It's like you can point them out. It's like the snowfields you go to, the Howling Tree, the you know the Castle Morn, like just all these places, Redmane Castle, like all these places like stand out, and I know them by name. Like I can, all of these locations, like I can recall very vividly, and like they're all the hallways, all the lakes, the plains, the mountains you climb, like all of it's just very distinct in my mind, and like it's pretty wild that they can do that. You also played a lot of this game, Nate, and
I did, yes.
It was your number 3. We waited to talk about it, so I mean, what do you want to? I feel like I just started talking and wasn't thinking about it, but yeah, I mean,
no.
Why was it such a highly rated game for you as well this year?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same reasons. I really enjoyed RPG aspects of it for most of the game. I definitely got burnt out at some point in this game, which is why it didn't quite make it to the top of my list. But even with getting burnt out for the back quarter of the game and just like basically rushing towards the end and stopping doing any side stuff, like still absolutely one of my favorite games I played this year. It, has so much breadth of things to find and then to either incorporate into your build or imagine how you could, incorporate that into a different build, or respecking your character is easier in this game than in any previous FromSoft Souls game. So you can really, if you want to, like change your build multiple times throughout a playthrough to keep things fresh, which in hindsight, maybe I should have done that, but that's
Did you go
neither here
Poison
nor there.
Fist?
No, I
Did you
didn't
go
do
Poison
Poison
Fist in
Fist.
Elden Ring? No?
I
Okay.
would have loved to find a good Poison Fist build.
That should be an option though, because there are fist weapons and there are
Are.
poison ashes of war. So
Absolutely, yeah. I bet there is a
you can
Poison
do
Fist
it.
build. I was a Dark Flame build. I found all the Dark Flame spells and bumped up my faith stat really high and used a Darth Maul style twin blade staff thing, and it was really edgy about
You
it.
were twirling your twin blade and chucking fireballs everywhere.
And chucking black fireballs, and found the one Art of War or whatever it's called that can stun lock people really easily by shooting fire.
Flame of the Redmanes. I use it too.
That was it. Yep.
I use it on my big honking greatsword.
Had a ton of fun with that. Had a ton of fun with the big, like very meticulously designed areas like Stormvale Castle, like the capital city, Landell. Those were my favorite parts of the game. Running around the open world was really cool at first and slowly wore off on me after a while, and the repeated dungeons wore on me after a while, but like those landmark locations were really awesome.
And I think what's impressive is like even within the open world, like I mean, Stormvale is obviously the highlight we always talk about, but like that's probably as good as any area in any of their previous games too. Like they managed to get like almost a best of highlight reel, type of dungeon design. It's just stuck in Elden Ring in a couple places like Stormvale and Landau.
Stormvale Castle is like the first major area you come to the game, and it's like they dropped like 25% of a Dark Souls size game into this giant dungeon castle area. It's great. It's very good.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game. We did do a spoiler cast on this one for like 3+ hours. So if you want to hear more thoughts on me and Nate and 4 others of the Atacs crew who aren't here today, but we had a whole crew discussing Elden Ring for many hours. So there's more discussion on that one that you can find in the feed as well. But I think that's gonna do it for our discussion here. We will do a shout out of our top 10s if we want to do shout outs for that. We just did a lengthy discussion covering each of our top 5 games of the year. So it was nice to get some good, like actually give those games their due and like really talk about why we like them so much this year. But yeah, I think it would also be nice to have a chance to like if you want to count out your whole top 10 from 10 down to 1, and for the ones we didn't talk about, if you want to say like just a quick sentence or two of why you liked it, feel free. But Will, you want to start us off with counting down your top 10 for the year?
Sure. At number 10, Volition Saints Row reboot. There's been 4 main Saints Row games, 1 spinoff. I liked it because it was hilarious, and even though some people would say that it didn't get as it's like, where do you go once you're like the president in space, which I guess was what was going on in the previous Saints Row games. Like, I still think it was silly enough. There was this football you could throw to enemies, and then it would like shoot them way up in the air. It was like it had some sort of like hydro thruster on it, and I mean there was a lot of ludicrousness in it. 9, I have Research and Destroy, another Games Pass jam. It's probably the hardest one to explain succinctly, but I'll do my very best. It's sort of like a hybrid real-time / turn-based strategy game where each of your turns is sort of turn-based, but also, I don't know, real-time. You've got this sort of time amount with each character, and within that time, you're able to do a certain number of things. And depending on what you want to do, it might take more or less of that time. But essentially, you're trying to push back this invasion of supernaturals with these 3 super scientists that you have on a team. And you can research things from the aliens and then put them out and have interesting guns or gadgets or whatever it is. At number 8, I've got Hellslave, which is basically this dark dungeon crawler ARPG that has a lot of different equipment and a lot of different build options. Essentially, to survive in that world, you have to ally with a demon, and that's a build option in and of itself, depending on what that demon helps you do. But also, you want to push back the demons because in your heart, you're a human. At 7, I've got Escape Academy, which is, I've played tons of co-op escape rooms. It's pretty much the best one I've ever played. It's got a lot of really, really smart design decisions. It's got an overarching story, which is weird for these escape room games because a lot of them are just like, you're in a meat locker, get out of there, And so it was kind of interesting to have this sort of overarching story. At 6, I have Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Extraction, which is a mouthful. It's a really good sort of co-op first-person shooter, I guess. That kind of there's this alien invasion. The aliens are very, very interesting. You're moving through these different zones, trying to kind of clear the alien threat and sort of do these objectives. Main reason I like it is because it forces players to play stealthily in a really, really smart way. And that's just not something you see very often in co-op games. And then the other ones are the ones we've already heard. So at 5, I have Tinykin. 4, God of War Ragnarok. 3, Horizon Forbidden West. 2, Nobody Saves the World. And 1, Citizen Sleeper.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, that's a good collection of games. Well done, sir. And
I liked all of them.
All 10 of them. You liked them all.
I liked all of them.
Imagine that.
And Mr. Nate, what about your top 10 for the year?
Sure. This is my list as I have it right now, which will probably change before I actually do a write-up and post something.
Nate never finalizes his list until like May, so
yeah.
This is the preview. This is the
early version, early access
version.
Yep.
we got there at the same time. All right, go for it.
I have number 10, Sifu, the very weird action game where you have to progress through a sequence of levels, and every time you die, your character ages a certain number of years, and you try to get to the end of the game before you get too old. And it has really cool combat. It's fun, but weird. Number 9, Pokemon Legends Arceus, the best of the 2 completely busted Pokemon games that released this year.
2 chances and they were both broken.
Yeah. Number 8, I have Norco, a point-and-click adventure game that is ridiculous and strange and extremely well written and portrays a very sort of in line with Citizen Sleeper in some ways, a very capitalist hellscape that has a lot of interesting characters and a lot of good writing.
And also on Game Pass.
Also on Game Pass. Number 7, I have God of War Ragnarok, which we already talked about. And then number 6, I have Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin.
Man, it's coming from left field there. Just chaos stealing the
chaos has entered the field.
All right, so I have to give me your elevator pitch. Why is that at number 6? What are you doing?
Man.
You madman.
That game is something else. I enjoyed the madness. I enjoyed punching Tonberries to death.
You know, as someone who's played Final Fantasy games but has not played this game, the idea of punching a Tonberry does sound enticing.
This game is ridiculous in every way. The combat system is so much more complex than it needs to be, but it's still kind of fun to play with. And the story is absolutely insane nonsense that I feel like it played a trick on me because it's bad, but by the end I was like, yeah, you know what? This is a great story. I like this game. And I feel like maybe I got duped.
Okay.
So anyway, the last 5 were the ones we talked about. Number 5, Tinykin.
Okay,
go ahead, Will. Go ahead, Will.
No, go ahead. No, I mean, I played Stranger of Paradise, and I have got no history with Final Fantasy at all. So I don't know that there was any like nostalgia hooks for it to grab, but I mean, I just remember this main character, like this, some girl who was kind of interested in him walking up to him, and she's like, "Oh," and she puts her, "Oh, Jack," or whatever the heck. Is his name Jack? It is, right?
It's Jack, yeah.
Yeah, I say, "Oh, Jack," and she puts her arm on him, and he's like, "Huh? Huh? Huh? Huh?" I'm like, buddy. He's like, calm down. You're okay, bud. It's just a female. You know what I mean? It's
okay. That game has some cutscenes in it.
It does.
Number 5, Tinykin. Number 4, Triangle Strategy. Number 3, Elden Ring. Number 2, Marvel Snap. And number 1, Citizen Sleeper.
Good job with the snap there.
Yep. I had to time that. I think the mic probably caught it, but I snapped when I said Marvel Snap for the listener.
I caught it.
I think it caught it just a little bit. Okay. Well, I don't know if I can follow up that kind of chaos, but
chaos.
All right, check it out. My top 10. Number 10 is Pokemon Legends Arceus. I didn't play the other broken Pokemon game, but I did enjoy this one, even with its faults. The main thing for me was just they made the act of catching Pokemon like feel like a magical thing again, which has not felt that way in a long time. Like the revamped mechanics, I think there's a lot of issues around the edges of this one. It can be rough, but that core of catching Pokemon, they nailed that core, which was important, and I really like that. Number 9 is Escape Academy, which Will talked about, and I liked it. A lot of the same reasons Will liked it. Unlike Will, I have not played a lot of escape room games, so this was my first one, but it sounds like I maybe picked one of the better ones. And yeah, my partner and I just had a really good time. This was a really good co-op experience, and puzzling through it was a lot of fun. Also on Game Pass. We do not get ad money from Microsoft, by the way.
You might think that, but no.
I should say that. Number 8, Marvel's Midnight Suns. I'm actually still playing this game, but this game is very, very goofy, but I kind of into its goofiness. Like its writing is like a CW like a superhero show, like that caliber writing.
I mean,
But
it is absolutely not the goofiest writing that's in a game on a top 10 list on this
yeah,
podcast.
I mean, I feel like I have a blank check here after Nate's list. So, but yeah, despite the bad writing, there's a really endearing quality to like just hanging out with your superhero friends at basically superhero dormitory between missions, just hanging out at the pool, going bird watching, meditating, whatever you're wanting to do. And the combat itself, I think, the combat itself is without qualification like just legit really good and really fun. So like it has that anchor to balance out the dozens and dozens of hours of just chilling at the dorm with your superhero friends. My number 7 is Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, which was one of my biggest surprises of the year because I played the first game, Kingdom Battle, and it was like, I liked it, but like didn't love it, and it got kind of repetitive, and wasn't one of my favorites of that year. But this one, I think they improved in some key ways, and I think it was a more like consistent experience throughout. And I think the way they changed the movement mechanics, I think, worked really well and kept me really engaged. And all the characters are distinct with different abilities, and the way you move around the battlefield is like a really different take on movement on a tactical. This is another tactics game, so like it's very different from like grid-based movement, and I think they found a good, unique hook for it there that worked well. Number 6 is Patrick's Parabox. This game also kind of surprised me this year, and it's a super clever puzzle game that has a lot of really interesting mechanics that can get kind of trippy, and you really have to think about them. But I think they found a good balance where I might put this in the space of something like a Baba Is You or a Steven Sausage Roll or something like that. But I think they found one thing that worked for me with this game is I think they found a better difficulty balance, because those games can be brutal, and like this game I got all the way through the main game without having to look anything up, and there are a bunch of side puzzles that I didn't do, and those probably get ridiculously hard, but like the core path, I think they did a really good job of balancing it, and they do a good job of each world has like a set of levels that revolve around a theme, and you kind of start the world, get introduced to like a puzzle idea, it builds on it for that world, and then the next world kind of starts over. So like it kind of has a good up and down flow of like constantly seeing new stuff, and it never without getting too difficult. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. That's a great Steam Deck game, by the way, is Patrick's Parabox. And then, top 5 we already talked about. Number 5 is Marvel Snap. 4, Triangle Strategy. 3, The Case of the Golden Idol. 2 is Tunic. And 1 is Elden Ring. We did it, you guys.
What a
lot
year.
of good games.
What a season, what a season.
Oh, I mean, I don't mean to be a hater, Nate. I mean, I mean, if you looked at critical reception to Saints Row, it was just as ludicrous a move for me to put that on a top 10 list. So I don't know.
All right. Well, it's a good podcast, y'all. I really enjoyed talking. I really enjoyed this chat. I really enjoyed talking about our favorite games of the year. It's good stuff.
Let's do it again next year.
Yeah. We'll do it again next year in the future. Once more.
All right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for discussing these, our favorite games of the year. Thank you, anyone, for listening. And I think we're going to call it a podcast with that. So we have been Atacs. I've been Flex, joined by Nate and Will, talking about our favorite video games of 2022. And that's going to be the end of our show. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.